It's time to talk about marketplaces. The good, the bad, the ugly, and some politics sprinkled on top of it. Marketplaces are two-sided platforms that connect buyers and sellers. Serve a very important function, are extremely hard to build. Now, why do they serve an extremely important function? Well, because as an SME, as a startup, frankly, any type of business nowadays, the marketplaces, outside of marketplaces in some sense, are extremely saturated. Pay diets are apparently always like just expensive enough so that your customer acquisition almost consumes your entire profit margin. Search or SEO is very competitive. You have to invest a ton into content. You have to invest a ton into backlinks. It takes forever to move the needle for you as a business. Social, especially organic, doesn't really work in the beginning. Trade shows are expensive. Channel partners are hard to find. I could go on and on and on. That's where marketplaces plug in. They can get you started as a business. As a matter of fact, they can keep you going as a business over time. What are examples of marketplaces? Well, marketplaces you will find across any type of business activity, from technology to e-com to services. If you're in one of those three categories, and every business is, you are likely going to have a major marketplace in your niche and you can't ignore it. Here are some examples. In technology, you have the app stores, the biggest marketplaces out there. Apple, the Apple App Store, Google, the Android App Store. You need to be on these platforms as an application, as a mobile app, to have any kind of traction because you otherwise cannot get on phones. If you are a SaaS product, AppSumo is a great place to be. Obviously, there are downsides with AppSumo specifically, such as, lifetime deals, very high discounts, but it can get you going. You may also think of G2 or Trustpilot to some degree as a marketplace, though they're lacking, as far as I know today, the critical capability of facilitating actual transactions. In e-commerce, you have Amazon if you are selling physical goods. You have Airbnb if you're renting out your apartments. You have Booking if you're a hotel. Booking is critical for any type of hotel nowadays and insanely annoying for most hotels. You have TripAdvisor if you're in travel. You've got plenty of other things that are local to your specific region that doesn't act on a global level, but is still a very important marketplace for you. In services, same story, especially if you're not the type of McKinsey or Boston Consulting services business. You most likely gotta be on Upwork, on Fiverr, on TopTal, on Catalent, whatnot, all of the names of these marketplaces are. So there are lots of them in every category of business and revenue generation. You will find them. And let's talk about some of the pros and cons of marketplaces. The pros are, from my perspective, they establish trust between two parties that don't know each other, especially as we're online, as we're making digital commerce, which means there's ultimately also social proof and social validation. There is the trust fabric in the digital world, and that's why they're so important. What that leads to is that they're lowering your initial customer acquisition cost as a business, which means you can get started with little capital. You can then continue the operations with cash flow coming from revenue. That's also another critical role. I'm saying lower initial customer acquisition cost intentionally because, for instance, all of the services-based platforms, but also most of the e-commerce platforms heavily cut into your profit margins, into your unit economics over time, anywhere from 10 to up to 30-40% of your top line of your revenue is moving right over to these marketplaces. So it's lower initially to get started, but high over time. Sales cycles also get faster because of the trust that's being created, because of also the stage where most of these marketplaces come on. For instance, on the services side, but also on the Amazon side, you don't necessarily go on Amazon to learn about problems that you have and how you potentially could solve those. You go to Amazon when you know you want to solve a specific problem and when you already have an idea how you want to solve it. That's where the platform comes in and helps you. So that accelerates it. What this means is if you are on one of these marketplaces, you're capturing demand. You're not generating demand or creating demand, depending on what language you want to use here. So these are some pros. Let me think about whether I have additional ones. I guess at least two ones that are kind of near and dear to my heart are you're expanding your potential reach, especially on the services side. You can go from regional or your personal network to global overnight. I've worked with clients from various places in the US, in the Middle East, over in Hong Kong, in Shanghai. It's been a wild ride just in terms of the types of regions that I get to interact with, and I'm very excited by that. And marketplaces based on, having lock-in on both the buyers and the sellers facilitate easier communication. I've spent literally entire days trying to figure out email deliverability issues that I was having when some random email block list put me onto their block list for some non-apparent reason. Ultimately got off those again, but it took time. Or at one instance, I messed up my DNS settings, wasn't able to send out any emails anymore, and marketplaces make it just much easier because you have a chat function with your buyers. Now, these are all pros, and I think, marketplaces have their right place, and there are good things about them, in addition to them just being incredibly hard to build. But there are also downsides that we need to face here. The first one relates back to what I just said about lower initial customer acquisition cost. Over time, these marketplaces will cut into your budget massively. They're effectively a taxation business and tax you as a company. That's on top of the taxes that you're already paying in your local jurisdiction. And that's my sort of, to some degree, political view. It is the role of governments to facilitate marketplaces, to facilitate the connection between buyers and sellers. Governments suck at that, especially in the digital world, have completely failed on that responsibility. That's where marketplaces come in and take that additional tax. But it's either governments that need to reduce their taxes because they're failing their responsibility, or it's marketplaces that would need to get regulated because, talk to a hotel that's on booking.com, for instance. There are zero hotels that enjoy being on booking.com other than just it generating revenue, right? But from a viability of the business perspective and perceived value creation. So taxation is a big one, and I'm a proponent of having to regulate marketplaces. The second one, and that plugs into the first one, is capture versus create demand. I mentioned that marketplaces are not the place to go to if you want to create demand for a category that doesn't exist yet. You need to do that in different ways. If you are in a niche where people are already expressing clear demand, for instance, you are running ads, or you help with SEO, or you sell shoes, or you're selling some kind of a fitness app or a to-do app, these are great places to go, but you're not going to create demand for a completely novel solution. And that plugs into the taxation problem, because ultimately what marketplaces do is they're splashing and splurging money on Google Ads, capturing all the demand that's out there, channeling it onto their marketplaces, and then charging you money for that service. It's very hard for you to make it work on your own outside of these marketplaces if you were to compete with them on Google, for instance, just because you're typically funded by venture monies. They're typically having very nice unit economics because they have no responsibility with regard to the delivery of the products and services that are being sold on them. So that's the second one here. The third one is lack of control. When you're on a marketplace, you do not control, first of all, how the marketplace changes over time from a feature and also from a supply and dynamics perspective. It could mean that the marketplace is introducing new features or is prioritizing certain services and offerings in their algorithms, and your traffic goes from yay to nay overnight. Entirely possible. In addition, marketplaces have the advantages that I spoke about, which means they're very likely very competitive. It could also mean that it's very hard to get started on a marketplace like Amazon. There are other marketplaces where it's easier to get started, but fundamentally you lack the control over your own prosperity as a business in some sense, which is a massive challenge if you want to scale the business and build something for the long term. And then lastly, dependency. Marketplaces are like drugs for businesses. They drive a ton of traffic, a ton of revenue, have all of these benefits, but when you try to move off of them, very hard to do. I've seen this in my business, have seen this with other businesses. If you are in e-commerce, you're not on Amazon, you're just losing out on a lot of revenue. If you are in services, and especially SME, and you're not on Upwork, you're not on Fiverr, and what these platforms are all called, it hurts you. The moment you try to move off, it feels terrible. you will take a hit on revenue, and so you're getting dependent. You're getting hooked on this drug that drives revenue for you. So that's the pros and cons. I think on baseline, there are still a lot more benefits than downsides for young businesses. Highly recommend you get started on marketplaces. Again, helps massively with social proof. You can always later on take the hit and try to go off marketplaces. Would love for them to be regulated, but it's not going to happen. I don't think so. And that's why they have a very important part in a go-to-market stack for any kind of business nowadays. All right, that's it from my side. Hope you found this video on marketplaces useful. Leave comments in the I should do like this, in the comment section below. If you have questions, I'll get back to you. Leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. I would appreciate that. It gives me a signal on what kind of content makes sense and what doesn't. And since I continuously work on new content, follow, subscribe to the channel so that you are on top when I publish new stuff. Also means the world to me as a content creator. All right, that's it. Hope you found this useful. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.